Hello. Perhaps you didn't know, in the late 18th century, Europe was engulfed in violent upheavals. Great empires constantly clashed, revolutions and wars erupted one after another, reshaping the entire world. In that chaos, in France, a remarkable man emerged. A military genius and an outstanding leader, who would later not only become Emperor of the French, but also a nightmare, a formidable rival of all Europe. He was Napoleon Bonaparte, a name carved deeply into human history, remembered both as a great hero and as a man of limitless ambition. Napoleon Bonaparte was born on August 15, 1769, on the island of Corsica, a land that had just been annexed by France after being purchased from the Republic of Genoa. His family belonged to the minor nobility, with title but little wealth. As a child, Napoleon soon revealed his difference. While his peers were absorbed in play, he spent hours devouring books on history, warfare, and military strategy. It is said that he was especially fascinated by the stories of Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar, two figures he later regarded as models to follow. At the age of 9, Napoleon was sent to France to study at the Brienne Military Academy. Those were difficult years. The Corsican boy with a heavy accent was mocked and looked down upon. Yet instead of yielding, Napoleon turned isolation into motivation. He immersed himself in mathematics, history, and artillery, knowledge that would later become the foundation of his genius strategies. In 1784, he was admitted to the École Militaire, the most prestigious military school in France. There, Napoleon learned command, discipline, and tactics. Within just 1 year, he graduated, becoming an artillery officer at the age of only 16. To most, he was just a thin, quiet teenager of modest origins. But beneath that appearance lay a steely will, boundless ambition, and a belief that destiny had chosen him for greatness. Few could have imagined that this boy, once scorned in a foreign land, would step onto the stage of history and rise to become one of the most powerful men in the world. In 1789, the French Revolution erupted, shaking the nation to its core. King Louis XVI was overthrown, the feudal order crumbled, and France plunged into unprecedented turmoil. For many young officers, this was a chance to prove themselves. And Napoleon Bonaparte was one of them. His first great opportunity came in 1793, at the port city of Toulon. At that time, Toulon had rebelled against the revolutionary government and was supported by the British fleet. Amid the crisis, a young artillery officer, Napoleon, proposed a daring plan: seize the strategic high ground to drive out the British fleet. The plan succeeded beyond expectations. The British withdrew, Toulon was liberated. Napoleon instantly became a hero, promoted to brigadier general at the age of just 24. The victory at Toulon put his name in the spotlight, but the true turning point came in Italy. In 1796, he was appointed commander of the French army in Italy. When he took command, his army was poor, starving, and demoralized. Yet with his brilliant leadership, Napoleon transformed them into a fearsome war machine. Within less than a year, he won victory after victory against Austria and its allies. The battles of Montenotte, Lodi, Arcole, and Rivoli not only stunned Europe but also made Napoleon the brightest star in France. The soldiers regarded him as a living symbol. They called him the bringer of victory, a commander who always appeared at the decisive moment to inspire and lead them to triumph. Napoleon was not only a master of war but also of propaganda. He had victory bulletins printed, describing battles in a way that made the French public see him as a savior. His name spread everywhere, in newspapers, in tales told by word of mouth, even in heroic illustrations. In 1797, after the dazzling Italian campaign, Napoleon returned to Paris as a national hero. Crowds cheered, citizens celebrated, while politicians grew wary. A young general, talented, ambitious, adored by the army and the people, that was something no government could feel at ease with. From an obscure officer, Napoleon had become a commander-in-chief, a symbol of victory and national pride. But for him, this was not enough. He did not just want to be a general, he wanted more. And his path to power had only just begun. After his brilliant victories in Italy, Napoleon Bonaparte became the rising star of France. But in the eyes of many politicians, he was also a threat. A young, gifted general, adored by the people and revered by the army, this was unsettling to those in power. To make use of his talents while removing him from Parisian politics, the government sent him to a distant campaign, Egypt. In 1798, Napoleon led more than 35,000 men across the Mediterranean. His initial aim was to cut Britain's trade route to India and expand French influence in the Middle East. But the campaign carried another ambition, to transform Napoleon into not just a general, but also a man of enlightenment. When he set foot in the land of pyramids, Napoleon brought not only weapons but also scientists, scholars, and engineers. It was during this expedition that the French discovered the Rosetta Stone, the key that later unlocked the mysteries of Egyptian hieroglyphs. In July 1798, Napoleon faced the Mamluks at the Battle of the Pyramids. Against their formidable cavalry, he employed the square formation, a bold innovation. In just one day, over 20,000 Mamluks were crushed. To his soldiers, Napoleon declared, 40 centuries are looking down upon you from the tops of these pyramids. Yet behind this victory loomed disaster. The French fleet was almost completely destroyed by Admiral Nelson in the Battle of the Nile. Napoleon's army in Egypt was cut off, isolated, and increasingly vulnerable. Sensing the tide, Napoleon made a decisive move. He left his army behind and returned to Paris, seeking a greater stage, the political arena of France. By 1799, the country was in chaos. The revolution had stalled, the Directory government was weak, corrupt, and unpopular. The people longed for a strong leader to restore order. And Napoleon was the answer. On December 2, 1804, at the Grand Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, an unprecedented event took place. Before the eyes of the Pope, nobles, and foreign envoys, Napoleon Bonaparte crowned himself Emperor of the French. This act shocked the world. Traditionally, it was the Pope who placed the crown upon a monarch's head, symbolizing divine authority. But Napoleon deliberately seized the crown from the Pope's hands and set it upon his own head. The message was clear: his power came not from God, but from his own will and the people. As emperor, Napoleon undertook sweeping reforms. He modernized administration, restructured the legal system with the Napoleonic Code, built schools, developed infrastructure, and stabilized the economy. These reforms laid the foundation for modern France and left a legacy that still endures. But Napoleon was not only a reformer, he was also a conqueror. He dreamed of building an empire that stretched across Europe. From 1805 onward, he launched a series of campaigns against the great powers. At Austerlitz in 1805, known as the Battle of the Three Emperors, Napoleon defeated the combined armies of Austria and Russia in what is considered his greatest masterpiece. In just a single day, he crushed the Third Coalition, forcing Austria to surrender. Victories followed at Jena, Friedland, and Wagram. Napoleon's empire expanded from the Iberian Peninsula to Poland. At its height, the French Empire controlled most of continental Europe, and Napoleon stood as the most powerful man on the continent. Yet, behind the glory, dangers were brewing. His ambition had created enemies everywhere. The more he conquered, the more determined the other powers became to resist. The seeds of his downfall had already been sown. Between 1807 and 1811, Napoleon's empire reached its peak. He placed his brothers and loyal marshals as kings across Europe, in Spain, Italy, Holland, and beyond. From Paris, he dictated the fate of nations. His continental system, designed to blockade Britain and strangle its trade, demonstrated his ambition to subdue even the strongest naval power. Yet, this policy strained France and its allies, fueling resentment and rebellion. At home, Napoleon remained a symbol of glory. He was celebrated in paintings, songs, and monuments. To many, he seemed invincible, a man destined to rule the world, but behind the facade of greatness, cracks began to appear. The war in Spain turned into a brutal guerrilla conflict that drained French strength. The British, led by the Duke of Wellington, held firm in Portugal and harassed French troops relentlessly. And then came his most reckless gamble: Russia. Napoleon made the biggest mistake of his life, which was to attack Russia, the land of ice. Russia was a vast empire stretching from Eastern Europe to Siberia in Asia. It was also a country with a harsh climate. The autumn was wet, the roads turned to mud, making it impossible for artillery and logistics vehicles to move effectively. The winter was long, extremely cold, in many places -20 to -30 degrees Celsius. This was the graveyard of Napoleon's army. In 1812, Napoleon made the fateful decision to invade Russia. His aim was to force Tsar Alexander I back into the continental system. Confident of victory, he assembled the Grande Armée, over 600,000 soldiers from across Europe, the largest army the continent had ever seen. At first, the French advanced rapidly. But the Russians avoided open battle, retreating deeper into their vast land while using scorched earth tactics. Villages were burned, supplies destroyed, and the French found themselves marching into emptiness. In September 1812, Napoleon won the bloody Battle of Borodino. But it was a Pyrrhic victory, tens of thousands were killed on both sides, and the Russian army remained intact. When Napoleon finally entered Moscow, he found the city in flames, abandoned and useless. Winter closed in. With no supplies, disease and hunger ravaged the army. Temperatures dropped below freezing, men froze to death, horses perished, cannons were abandoned in the snow. Harassed by Russian forces, the once mighty Grande Armée disintegrated. Of the 600,000 who had crossed into Russia, fewer than 100,000 returned. It was not merely a defeat, it was a catastrophe. The myth of Napoleon's invincibility was shattered. After the Russian disaster, Napoleon's enemies united. In 1814, Allied armies marched into Paris. Napoleon was forced to abdicate and was exiled to the island of Elba. Many thought his story had ended. But Napoleon was not a man to accept obscurity. In March 1815, he escaped Elba and returned to France. Miraculously, soldiers sent to arrest him joined his cause. As he marched to Paris, the people cheered, and within days, he was back in power. This extraordinary episode became known as the 100 Days. Europe, however, would not allow his return. The great powers quickly assembled their forces. On June 18, 1815, at Waterloo in present-day Belgium, Napoleon faced the Duke of Wellington and the Prussian army under Blücher. The battle raged fiercely. At times, victory seemed within his grasp. But delays, exhausted troops, and the timely arrival of the Prussians turned the tide. By evening, the French army was crushed. Waterloo marked the final defeat of Napoleon. His legend ended on that muddy battlefield, and with it, an era of European history closed. After Waterloo, Napoleon was captured by the British. This time, they would not make the mistake of sending him near Europe. Instead, he was exiled to the remote island of St. Helena, in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, a place from which escape was impossible. On that desolate rock, surrounded by guards and isolation, the once mighty emperor spent his last years. He wrote memoirs, dictated stories of his campaigns, and tried to shape how history would remember him. On May 5, 1821, at the age of 51, Napoleon Bonaparte passed away. Far from the battlefields, far from Paris, he died a prisoner, yet still a legend. Napoleon's legacy remains immense. His Napoleonic Code became the foundation of modern legal systems. His reforms modernized France. His campaigns reshaped the map of Europe and inspired generations of soldiers and leaders. For some, he is remembered as a hero who brought glory to France. For others, as a tyrant whose ambition cost millions of lives. But whether admired or condemned, one thing is certain: Napoleon Bonaparte changed the course of history forever. From a boy on a remote island, mocked and underestimated, to an emperor who shook the very foundations of Europe, the life of Napoleon Bonaparte was a tale of brilliance, ambition, triumph, and tragedy. His story reminds us that greatness often comes at a price, and that even the mightiest empires can fall. Napoleon once said, "Glory is fleeting, but obscurity is forever." And indeed, though his empire crumbled, his name endures, immortal in the memory of mankind. The story of Napoleon's life ends here. If you want a video about a historical figure that you like, leave it in the comments below.